How are you mourning? What does your grief work include? Grief, mourning, and grief work are personal. Welcome to Living Life in Color Again, the podcast for anyone who has lost a loved one to homicide. I'm your host, Kimberly Christopher. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to you for listening. Based upon the name of this podcast, it is fair to conclude that all of the episodes will feature depressing content. Humans have a natural tendency to avoid discomfort, so I thank you for being curious enough to listen. But I assure you that not every episode will be heavy. The through line of my content is encouragement for homicide survivors to live healthy and fulfilling lives. And I do that in part by sharing information regarding how death by homicide impacts loved ones left behind. I also want to take a moment to say that you don't have to be a homicide survivor to feel drawn to this content. In fact, I know several people who are not homicide survivors who enjoy listening. The lens through which I present data, and to a large degree, how I experience life anymore, is that of a person whose loved one died by homicide. However, even if you haven't experienced this loss, you might find something useful. So I invite you to continue listening. Today's topic is one that many of us can relate to: grief. Years ago, I remember an elder telling a group of us young adults that if we hang around this place long enough, we will experience loss. This place is Earth, and loss includes heartbreaks, life changes like divorce, and the loss of family members. These are just a few examples of losses that lead to grief. Grief, what is it? How does it differ from mourning, and why do we need both? Let's jump in. First, I think it's important to align on language. Let's spend a few moments defining key terms that will be used today. Those terms are grief, mourning, and grief work. Simply put, grief is the internal emotional experience of loss, encompassing a wide range of feelings like sadness, anger, guilt, shock, and disbelief. In his book, Grief After Homicide, Dr. Alan D. Wolfett offers this definition. Grief is everything we think and feel on the inside after experiencing a life loss. This is definitely a great working definition of grief to move us through this conversation. Mourning is the external expression of grief, often through ceremonies, rituals, and social interactions. This can include attending funerals, wearing certain clothing, or engaging in practices like prayer or meditation. Dr. Wolfett asserts that there are 6 needs of mourning. Need number 1, acknowledge the circumstances and reality of the death. If you find yourself replaying the circumstances of the death over and over, know that this replay is your brain's way of trying to grasp what happened. This replay is common and may be necessary in helping you acknowledge the loss. Need number 2, embrace the pain of the death and the loss. What does that mean? It means allowing yourself to feel it and understand the appropriateness of the fact that you are in pain. When pain tries to get your attention, stop what you're doing or make an appointment with the pain for later in the day and let it wash over you. Cry if you need to. You will come to understand that it's necessary to get acquainted with pain and accommodate it into your ongoing life. Need number 3, tell your story of the death and the life of the person who died. This refers to immersing yourself in stories and memories of the life of the person who died. While mourning need 1 is about acknowledging the facts of the death, mourning need 3 involves coming to an understanding about what happened and creating a narrative that you can live with. Need number 4, develop a new self-identity. Part of your self-identity was formed by the relationship that you had with the person who died. So the way that you defined yourself may have changed as a result of the loss. Re-anchor yourself to reconstruct your self-identity, which can be painful and challenging to do. Consider the following questions to begin. Who were you? Who are you? Who do you want to be moving forward? Need number 5. Search for meaning. Many people touched by homicide loss come to realize that there is no meaning to the tragedy itself. There can be meaning in the ways they and others respond to what happened. For many survivors, questions like, what will I do now? How can I help prevent this from happening again? Or how can I honor the life of the person who died? Are questions that do have answers. These are the questions that can eventually lead to peace and a renewed love for life. And need number 6, receive and accept help from others. Reach out to friends and family members whom you know have the capacity to listen with empathy. Many are at a loss for what to say or do, and that's okay. If they ask how they can help, tell them what you need. If you're not sure, it's okay to say that too. Try to avoid having someone in your presence who adds to your stress. Grief work is a more technical term used in psychology and counseling to describe the process of actively working through grief and adapting to a new reality after a loss. Sigmund Freud proposed the original grief work theory in 1917. Grief work involves not just expressing emotions, but also actively processing the loss, making sense of it, and finding ways to move forward. While grief and mourning are distinct, they are intertwined. Grief is the feeling, and mourning is the action taken in response to that feeling. Grief work helps us understand and process our grief, and mourning provides a way to share and externalize that grief. Activities that we engage in that bring peace to our minds and nervous systems can be considered grief work. For example, gardening, moving your body, feeling the connection to your loved one by replaying old voice messages, or engaging in support group sessions. These activities can offer a therapeutic outlet for processing emotions, finding solace, and even honoring the memory of a loved one. The act of tending to a garden can provide a sense of purpose, reduce stress, and foster a connection to nature, which can be particularly helpful during times of loss. So grief work doesn't have to be expensive, fancy, or even look the same for you as it does for someone else. Are grief and mourning important? Yes, they are natural and essential processes for adapting to life without a loved one. Ignoring grief and mourning can lead to various physical and mental health problems. It can weaken the immune system, leading to increased susceptibility to illness and cause sleep disturbances, fatigue, and digestive issues. Additionally, it can contribute to chronic stress, anxiety, and depression, potentially exacerbating existing health conditions or leading to new ones, like heart disease. In the coming weeks, I will focus on the impact that grief has on the mind and body, so look for those in the near future. Now we are ready to introduce some grief frameworks and theories that give language to what we might feel and think on the inside after experiencing a life loss. This is a partial list of grief models and frameworks that exist, so feel free to research more if this interests you. First, let's look at the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief model. This might be one of the most popular paradigms for understanding the emotional process of grieving. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a Swiss-American psychiatrist who included this framework in her 1969 book on death and dying. Kubler-Ross developed this model after working with terminally ill patients who were processing their emotions while navigating their mortality. The 5 stages are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Since 1969, the Kubler-Ross grief model has been applied to grieving friends and family who seem to undergo a similar process. In the 1980s, the 5 stages of grief evolved into the Kubler-Ross change curve, which is now widely utilized by companies to navigate and manage organizational change and loss. However, critics of this model have warned against using it too literally when describing the emotions that a bereaved person experiences. These stages are not necessarily experienced in order, nor are they necessarily experienced by everyone. The second framework that we will discuss is the attachment theory of grief. First described in 1982 by British psychiatrist John Bowlby, attachment theory predicts two responses to the absence of our loved one: protest and despair. Bowlby had studied infant orphans of World War II and described their protest and despair when they were orphaned. He made comparisons to separation reactions in other animal species as well, which provided insights into the basic science of why loss has such a huge impact. His studies of separation revealed the invisible tether of attachment between parent and child, asserting that we cannot study grief and loss without first studying love and bonding. Protesting separation and making the effort to stay together is part of our attachment bond. When I read about the attachment theory of grief, I immediately thought of the following quote: "Grief is just love with no place to go." Even when the object of that love is no longer physically present, we find ourselves feeling deep despair. The third framework that I'd like to discuss is the dual process model of grief, created by Margaret Strobe and Hent Schutt in 1999. This model demonstrates how humans bounce between loss-oriented coping, things that focus on grief, and restoration-oriented coping, things that focus on rebuilding your life. The focus for loss-oriented coping is processing the loss, acknowledging the pain of grief, and experiencing the impact of the deceased's absence. Coping includes engaging in grief work, such as crying, therapy, remembering, reminiscing on life before the loss, and expressing feelings about the loss. The focus for restoration-oriented coping includes adapting to life without the deceased, adjusting to new roles and responsibilities, and regaining a sense of normalcy. These activities include learning new skills, managing daily tasks, forming new relationships, and engaging in activities that help to distract from grief. Some examples of restoration-oriented coping activities include learning how to manage finances or spending time with friends. The dual process model of grief emphasizes that grieving is not a linear process, but rather an ongoing oscillation between loss-oriented and restoration-oriented coping. Bouncing between loss and restoration is a natural and healthy part of the grieving process. As I reflect on my 26-year grief journey, this resonates with me. In closing, I would like to share Dr. Alan Wolford's Bill of Rights for Homicide Grievers. He asserts that as a homicide griever, you have certain rights that bear repeating and upholding. Here are the 10 rights. First, you have the right to emotional and spiritual intensive care. Homicide creates a two-part grief experience like no other. You have been deeply wounded by a traumatic loss, and you need and deserve emotional and spiritual intensive care. 2, you have the right to feel safe. You may be experiencing some degree of post-traumatic stress, and you have the right to get extra help and to do whatever you need to do to feel safe again. 3, you have the right to experience your own unique grief. When you turn to others for help, don't allow them to tell you what you should or should not be feeling. 4, you have the right to talk about your grief. Talking about your grief will help you heal. Seek out others who will allow you to talk as much as you want, as often as you want, about both parts of your grief. If at times you don't feel like talking, you also have the right to be silent. 5, you have the right to feel whatever you feel. Others may try to tell you that certain feelings like anger or unforgiveness are wrong. Don't take these judgmental responses to heart. Instead, find listeners who will accept your feelings without judgment. 6, You have the right to be tolerant of your physical and emotional limits. Your feelings of trauma and loss will probably leave you feeling fatigued. Respect what your body and mind are telling you. 7. You have the right to embrace your spirituality. Allow yourself to be around people who understand and support your religious or spiritual beliefs. If you feel angry at God, find someone to talk with who won't be critical of your feelings. 8. You have the right to search for meaning. Watch out for the cliched responses some people may give, like, "It was God's will." That isn't helpful, and you do not need to agree with it. 9. You have the right to treasure your memories. Instead of avoiding your memories, intentionally befriend them and find others with whom you can share them. And 10. You have the right to move toward your grief and heal. Reconciling your homicide grief will not happen quickly. Be patient with yourself. Avoid people who are impatient and intolerant with you. Grief impacts us in both quiet and loud ways. Sometimes others have no idea that we are grieving because they don't see it. Other times people are fully aware that something is having an impact on our emotions. It's important to listen to your body and mind. Allow yourself to feel the emotions that surface and begin to embrace grief work, the process of actively working through grief and adapting to a new reality after the loss. Do you try to stifle your grief? How are you mourning? What does your grief work include? Grief, mourning, and grief work are personal. I encourage you to lean into people, places, and things that match your personality and perspectives to create your own path to healing. Before we close, I want to have a moment of silence for anyone who is mourning the recent death of a loved one to homicide, anyone observing the anniversary of a loved one's death, or navigating holidays and/or the birthday of a departed loved one. May you find peace. May you find compassion. Thanks for listening. If you found this helpful, subscribe to the podcast on iHeartRadio or Spotify and share with your friends. Until next time.